And so that leads us into the second part of my talk this morning. Why does marriage matter? Because you could say, all right, Ryan, that's fine and good. You, Sharif, and Robbie have articulated a distinctive type of human good, this comprehensive good that you call marriage. Why should anyone care? Why should the state in particular care? Why should the state of California, why should the nation state, why should politics care about this form of friendship, this form of relationship, this form of community? So let me say a few words about that. I work at a public policy think tank, so this is where I do spend a bit of my time and attention. I think from a policy vantage point, marriage exists to unite a man and a woman as husband and wife, so then they're then equipped to be mother and father to any children that that union produces. It's based on an anthropological truth that men and women are distinct and complementary. It's based on the biological fact that reproduction requires a man and a woman. It's based on the social reality that children deserve both a mother and a father. Whenever a child is born, a mother will be close by. She's normally in the same room. That's a fact of biology. The question for culture, and so therefore the question for policy, is will a father be close by? And if so, for how long? And marriage is the institution that different societies throughout time and across the globe have devised to maximize the likelihood that that man commits to that woman permanently and exclusively, and then the two of them, committed to one another, take responsibility to raise that child. Because when this doesn't happen, social costs, both for the spouses and for the child and for all of the community, run high. But before getting to the cost, let me say one more thing about why that union matters. One of the things we know from the social scientists is that there's no such thing as parenting. No such thing as parenting in the abstract. There's mothering and there's fathering. Men and women bring different gifts to the parenting enterprise. And so in our book, we quote David Popenoe, a sociologist at at Rutgers University in New Jersey. He says, quote, "The burden of social science evidence supports the idea that gender-differentiated parenting is important for human development and that the contribution of fathers to child rearing is unique and irreplaceable," end quote. He then concluded, and this was in a literature review of all of the social science at that point, he says, "We should disavow the notion that mommies can make good daddies, just as we should disavow the popular notion that daddies can make good mommies. The two sexes are different to the core, and each is necessary culturally and biologically for the optimal development of a human being," end quote. And now a sociology professor, a social scientist like this, is always speaking in terms of, on average, for the most part, social science laws are not like physical laws, the law of gravity. I can guarantee you that if I let go of this water bottle and every time and place it's going to fall to the ground. Social science doesn't work that tightly. So this isn't to say, and I think this would get to Professor Lopez's question earlier to Professor Budashevsky, that there will be instances in which two moms or two dads, or a single mother or a single father, or a divorce and cohabiting relationship, all sorts of other arrangements, a child could turn out just fine. No one is denying that possibility. But it is to say that on average and for the most part, children who grow up without their married mother and father have a tougher road to hoe, that there are distinct challenges for a child in that situation. But let me say a word more about the parenting. What was Professor Popenoe trying to get at when he says that we should disavow the notion that mommies can make good daddies and that daddies can make good mommies? Let's do this with a thought experiment. If I told you it's Saturday morning, and instead of being at an academic conference at Stanford, a 5-year-old boy is at home in the living room wrestling with one of his parents. And this parent is teaching the 5-year-old to be masculine without being violent, that it's okay to put people in headlocks, but not to pull hair or bite or to gouge out eyes. Which parent is most likely, on average and for the most part, in the living room? Yeah, the laughter suggests that you know where I'm going with this. On average and for the most part, that's going to be the father. And it's not because we have a gender stereotype in which only fathers can wrestle on living room floors. It's because this is what comes naturally to dads. It's something that on average and for the most part, fathers enjoy doing with their 5-year-old sons in a way that mothers don't. And it's not to say that mothers can't wrestle on living room floors, but it's that on average and for the most part, they'd rather not. In the same way that you could see that it's normally the father that's throwing the baby up in the air, while the mother is saying, honey, not so high. And I think this gets at exactly what Professor Budiszewski said. Mothers tend to be the more nurturing, the more protecting, the caregiving relationship in the marital relationship. The mother tends to be that more nurturing one. And it's not to say that fathers can't be nurturing, but men tend not to be very sensitive. Well, on average, and for the most part, that's the way these things break down. So then, if that's the kind of thought experiment about Saturday morning on the living room floor, we can step back and just analyze the social science. What we know from the social science is that Saturday morning wrestling session, and then 5 years later, playing catch in the backyard, and then 5 years after that, discussing how to go to your first high school dance, that matters. And the father is doing something for his son. Because boys who grow up without their fathers, much more likely to commit crime and to end up in jail. What's taking place with the father wrestling on the living room floor with his son is exactly channeling of those masculine aggressions that sometimes can take a destructive turn. If you don't learn how to be physical without biting and pulling hair and eye gouging when you're 5, when you're 15, those same temptations might take you in a direction that ends up being criminal. And that's one of the things that fathers distinctively do for their boys. Now, fathers do something distinctive and complementary for their daughters. It tends to be the father who scares away the bad boyfriend. And this isn't because mothers can't scare away bad boyfriends, but it's because the father tends to be a little bit larger than the mother. His voice tends to be a little bit deeper than the mother's. And he also was once a boy himself, and he knows what the wrong sort of young man might be looking for in his daughter. And so he tends to be a little more sensitive about not letting his daughter go out with the wrong sort of boy. And like Professor Budiszewski mentioned, the father who's married to his daughter's mother is also modeling what a good male-female relationship looks like. And so he's modeling for his daughter what she should be looking for in the right sort of boyfriend who could become the right sort of husband. That's one of the things that a father who is married to his daughter's mother does for his daughter. So then when we take a step back and we look at the social science, girls who grow up without their fathers are more likely to suffer or to experience an out-of-wedlock pregnancy. Because that father is the one who's more often than not policing her sexual relationships. So all right, you could say that's fine and good. You've given us these thought experiments and you've told us a little bit about the consequences. Do you have any hard data? Let me read you a quote and then I'll ask you to tell me who spoke this quote. Quote, "We know the statistics that children who grow up without a father are 5 times more likely to live in poverty and to commit crime, 9 times more likely to drop out of school, and 20 times more likely to end up in prison. They are more likely to have behavioral problems or run away from home or become teenage parents themselves. And the foundations of our community are weaker because of it." End quote. Who spoke that? President Obama. Piers Morgan was a good second guess. President Obama. Now, President Obama will be the first to tell you that growing up without a father doesn't mean that you're somehow destined and doomed for failure in life. He seems to be doing pretty well for himself. But he would also be the first to tell you that his road was tougher. He had a steeper hill to climb. And this is one of the reasons why he's spoken out on the importance of fathers, because he's seen what it has done to so many children who grow up without their dad. It's why he has spoken about how important it is for him to be a good father to his 2 daughters. He's experienced firsthand the importance of fathers, and it inspires him to be a good father. And I don't think in any way did this suggest that single mothers are somehow anything less than heroic. Frequently, single mothers are the most heroic members of our society. When the father who abandoned the mother and abandoned the child left them, they were the ones left to take responsibility. They do a heroic job in raising their kids. And frequently, they would also be the first to tell you that they wish that man would have manned up, committed to them, and committed to the child. And so I don't want to suggest in any way that this is to criticize other people, but it is to say that marriage matters, and that the state has an interest in promoting marriage precisely to maximize the likelihood that every child is given the gift of being raised by a married mother and father. And at one point in American history, this happened. We had out-of-wedlock childbearing rates in single digits up until the 1960s. More or less every child was born into and raised by their married mother and father. And then in the past 50 years, we've seen those numbers progressively decline. So that today, 40% of all Americans, 50% of Hispanics, and 70% of African Americans are born outside of marriage. And these children have done nothing wrong, but they will have a much tougher chance in life. Because what we know is that marriage is the institution that when it's stable, it protects children from poverty. It increases the likelihood of those children will experience social mobility. It protects children from committing crime. And it prevents the state from having to pick up the pieces in the form of a welfare program or a police program. So more or less everything that you could care about, if you care about social justice and you care about limited government, if you care about the poor and you care about freedom, is better served by having a healthy marriage culture, a civil society institution that takes care of raising that next generation, than by having the government try to pick up the pieces of a broken marriage culture. That's why marriage matters.